the tense conference room, and an unforeseen farewell. I remember that day in late March like it was etched into my DNA, every little detail humming with a clarity that gets sharper the further away I get from it. The air in the Driefield Robotics conference room was stale with last night's reheated coffee and the ghost of too many broken promises. Across the polished, glacial surface of the monstrous conference table, Lawrence Bennett sat reclined with a smugness cultivated only by years of impunity. If suits could talk, his would have bragged for him. Tailored navy blue, silver cufflinks, and those shoes gleaming with an arrogance money can buy. His hair was combed with the precision of a man who expects the world to fall in line. He tapped a Montblanc pen, unhurried, almost lazy, before folding his hands and aiming that thin-lipped, practiced smile at me. "This shows you're not committed to our team, Jared," he said, each word as meticulously measured as his suit. He savored the moment like someone who believes they're granting you mercy by cutting you loose. On the walls, framed photos of innovation awards and trade show booths seemed to lean in, mute witnesses assembled to watch the company's script for offboarding unfold yet again. There was April from HR in the corner, hovering with a legal pad hugged tightly to her chest, already looking through me and onto her next task. I studied Lawrence, VP of Sales, his tan suspiciously deep for a Raleigh winter, clearly the courtesy of some Miami deal-making rather than Carolina sunlight. I could feel the invisible weight of years in that room. 4 of them for me, stacked up in overtime hours, missed birthdays, racking up millions for their ledgers while still living on ramen and dignity. My hands rested on the notepad in front of me, scribbles from the last strategy meeting still visible, strategies that would soon be someone else's concern. I was 29 years old, a few notches on my belt, but not quite the seat at the table I'd been sold. My savings account barely budged. My Honda Civic, the one I bought used when I thought everything big was ahead of me, was likely still collecting pollen in the company lot outside. Lawrence lingered for my reaction, waiting for some visible crack, a protest, a plea for second chances, the flailing of someone whose identity had fused too tightly with their job. I could almost feel him rooting for it, hoping I'd save him from the administrative awkwardness of a clean break. Instead, when his words settled over me like a heavy coat, something inside me, some old anxiety, shifted. There was a strange liberation in the seat of finality. "I understand," I told him quietly. He blinked, just for a flash, and I saw the disappointment flicker, like he'd just lost control of a story he'd carefully outlined. "You're terminated effective immediately," he continued, tone turning brisk, official. "April will escort you down to HR for your exit paperwork. Please clear out your desk. Thank you." In that moment, time sort of dilated. I rose, gathering my things with a steadiness that surprised me. A shake of the hand felt obligatory. I reached out and Lawrence, after a pointed pause as if calculating the photo op, finally took it. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, the words escaping with more finality than gratitude. Leaving that conference room, I felt 100 pairs of eyes flick to me then pivot away, pretending absorption in their screens. The unspoken code of the open office: act busy, witness nothing, don't risk empathy. Even as April shadowed my steps down the corridor jangling her keys, there was a sense that I had somehow disturbed a delicate ecosystem, like my leaving would mean theirs might become more visible too. As I entered my cubicle for the last time, the drone of hushed whispers and the hum of fluorescence suddenly seemed oddly harmonious, grounding me in reality. I opened my drawers, a mug from my sister, pens misappropriated from countless trade shows, and a cactus stubbornly clinging to life. I packed them in a cardboard box. My career, condensed and portable, just another item rolling down the conveyor belt of corporate memory. On my way out, I passed every achievement I'd ever thought mattered. Sales awards with my name already gathering dust, half-forgotten inside plastic cases, soon to be wiped clean for the next name. The walk to the elevator was both long and absurdly short, a corridor of silence broken only by the distant ping of the break room microwave. I glanced once over my shoulder at Lawrence, now already drawn into calls about tomorrow's numbers. He was moving on, and oddly, so was I. The awkward handshake and colleagues' strange stares. As I approached Lawrence's desk, my box of belongings balanced on one hip, the other hand free, I felt a mounting sense of theatricality to the proceedings, as if the moment demanded a grand gesture. I smoothed my palm on my dress shirt, heartbeat steady but strange, and extended my hand toward him. The old ritual of, "Thank you for the opportunity." That awkward dance meant to let both sides save face. Lawrence looked at my hand for a beat longer than was comfortable, his gaze cool, almost academic, like he was curious to see which script I'd follow. Finally he clasped my hand, his grip firm but impersonal, not a hint of empathy in his eyes. There was an unspoken power dynamic in that handshake, a final act marking the close of 4 years spent chasing validation in his shadow. I felt the warmth drain from the gesture almost instantly, a quick sanitized exchange, no lingering squeeze, no reassurances, just the transactional closure of a business agreement, severed cleanly. As I stepped back and pivoted toward the open office, I found a wall of faces carefully avoiding my gaze. People who minutes earlier had been chatting over Slack messages or comparing schedules were now hunched further into their monitors, expressions pinched with a mixture of embarrassment, pity, and a thread of relief. No one wanted to linger too long on the downfall, the fear of contagion, the silent calculation, will it be me next? It was there in the way a junior analyst fiddled with her wireless mouse, the way someone at the next pod pretended to study an irrelevant spreadsheet with breathtaking focus. Each footstep felt louder, echoing in spaces where I'd once shouted over office banter, now reduced to an invisible presence. Here and there a pair of eyes darted up, only to snap back to their screens. I caught the gaze of Marco from IT, who'd once commiserated with me over broken printers and March Madness brackets. His eyes flicked away, apology written clear. Tanya from marketing, who'd always laughed loudest at my dumb meeting jokes, now tapped her pen an octave too fast, her entire body telegraphing discomfort. I realized that, even after so long together, connections here were more brittle than they'd seemed. The open plan office suddenly felt glass-walled, everyone could see, but no one reached through. My exit, carried out in slow motion, forced everyone to confront their own job security, even the ones still joking in the break room, even the supervisors who studied their inboxes instead of meeting my eye. Walking down that corridor, clutching my box of mismatched corporate mementos, I felt the chilling truth settle in. You are only ever as visible as your utility. On either side, my colleagues maintained a careful choreography. Heads bowed, headphones suddenly secured, a few giving that fleeting smile meant to say, "Sorry man, but not too sorry." April from HR shadowed me, keycard jangling, the aftertaste of procedural closure hovering in the air. As I crossed the threshold for the last time, the office fell back into its routines. Files scrolled, coffee hissed, the buzz rose again, as if nothing had changed. And yet, in the brittle hush of those stares and the echo of that awkward handshake, I understood. Departures are rarely about the one who leaves. They're about everyone left behind, shaken by the proof that any day, it could be their turn to make that walk. Memories of a salesman and the values passed down from my father. Sometimes when I'm driving the same used Honda down I-440, the radio tuned to some soft rock station, I picture my father on the road up and down New England. I see him in a weathered blue blazer, his name stitched on a battered duffel, trunks stuffed with pill samples and boxes of pens branded by pharmaceutical companies you'd never see on TV. Dad was a legend in the Boston pharma sales circuits. Even before LinkedIn, people in the business talked about him at trade shows, stories passed around like baseball cards. To me though, he was just Dad. The guy who came home late, smelling like aftershave and diner coffee, still managing to make it to my Little League games just in time to wave from behind the bleachers. He didn't talk much about work when I was a kid, but the times he did, it stuck. I remember one afternoon, I couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, sitting in his car with my feet barely reaching the floor mats. He handed me a water bottle and turned off the ignition. "Listen, Jared," he said, his Boston accent curling around the syllables. "Anyone can sell something to somebody, that's business. But the ones who last, they solve problems, they show up, keep their word, and turn maybe into absolutely. That's what matters." Years later, when I told him I got the job at Driefield, his chest puffed out in that way dads do. Solid company, good industry. Just remember the numbers are important, but your reputation is what buys you a second meeting. I took that to heart, from my first cold call to the senior directors down to my last client negotiation. Never fudge the details, never promise something I couldn't deliver. It was Dad's voice in my head at 2 a.m, rewriting follow-up emails, double-checking order forms, grinding out results even when bonuses kept slipping away. The older I got, the more aware I became of the cost of Dad's career. Mom used to joke he practically lived on coffee and cheap motels, but she meant it with pride, because that hustle gave us everything we had. No missed mortgage payments, summer trips to Cape Cod, and college savings I only half deserved. I realized the unspoken sacrifices, birthdays missed, anniversaries delayed, Dad's body slumped at the kitchen table in the blue wash of midnight TV, scribbling out territory plans on legal pads. When the grind at Driefield felt impossible, sales targets moving like goalposts in a windstorm, bonuses receding into the horizon, I thought of Dad hitting the pavement, windshield wipers slapping snow at dawn, hand warming the steering wheel. He was tired too, probably more than I ever knew, but he always said, "You do it right, not just fast." And at the end of the day, people do business with people they trust. Now, after everything, I carry his words with me like a roadmap. In this business, your name is everything, your anchor when the current tries to rip you out, and no matter how much the industry changes, that lesson doesn't. On days when I catch my reflection in a car window, tie askew, looking a little too much like the man I used to watch in awe, I remember, Dad didn't just teach me how to close a deal, he taught me why the deal should matter in the first place. When success disappears because advancement favors the well-connected. It hit me slowly, then all at once, how the currency of success in corporate America wasn't always measured in quarters closed or profits won, but so often traded in the invisible stock of relationships. For the first 2 years at Driefield Robotics, my life had revolved around numbers, quotas, and the adrenaline of challenge. I was the young gun, rookie of the year, the guy who pulled in impossible contracts for the department. My metrics doubled targets, and my name regularly flashed in group emails praising achievement. For a while, that was enough for me to believe in the mythos of meritocracy. But then came Tyler Davis, my supervisor. He was the sort of guy who could light up a room, always with a charming story about a fraternity brother who now ran some logistics startup, or a third cousin's roommate who once invested in Uber. People gravitated toward him. He knew everyone that mattered in sales. Unlike my humble beginnings, Tyler's ascent seemed paved by holiday cocktail parties, rounds of golf with directors, and private Slack channels I was never invited to. He kept the mood light, deflected failures with jokes, and left meetings with promises that always sounded just vague enough to never be held accountable. The real dissonance showed itself when promotions came around. Tyler's sales numbers were good, but mine were frankly the envy of the floor. I was closing the big ones, making the calls, staying late. When the team's Sales Summit Awards were announced in Dallas, I'd mentally rehearsed a thank you speech in my hotel bathroom, expecting at least a nod. Instead, I sat in the audience watching Tyler stride onto stage, his name attached not just to joint projects, but to 2 contracts I'd spearheaded alone. The room buzzed for him. I clapped, my palms stinging with disbelief. After the summit, a few colleagues gathered in the lobby for drinks. I nursed a soda, still in shock, as Tyler regaled a group of senior execs with stories and dropped in references to his people at LinkedIn and downstream vendors. He caught my eye once as the laughter peaked, a flicker of something like apology maybe, then just his easy grin. Back at the office, the fallout became routine, a meeting invite missing from my calendar, CC threads left off crucial client updates, and Tyler increasingly brought into meetings as the face of successful initiatives that, privately, I'd built from scratch. Still, I told myself to push through. Heroes don't get made by complaining. But the politics pierced deeper. For an entire quarter, I delivered the top numbers, and when it came time to hand out responsibilities for the new product line, the role went, not to me but a junior associate Tyler had vouched for. "Trust the process," HR emailed. "Your chance will come." It wasn't lost on anyone that the promotion dinner was hosted at a country club where Tyler's dad played tennis with the division director, another invisible thread in the tapestry I'd never get to touch. The message was clear: show up, perform, but advancement was for those with the right networks, not just results. Over time, my passion faded into a numb efficiency. The feeling of building something real, the drive that got me up for every red-eye flight, drained into going through the motions, counting down days instead of milestones. I learned the hard way that in this corner of the American workplace, success could evaporate the second relationships outpaced results. The merit had gotten me noticed, but connections determined who lasted long enough to matter. It wasn't just about earning trust or showing grit, it was about who carried your story into the room when you weren't there to tell it yourself. The final straw, a monumental deal, and a cold shock. The moment that tipped the scales didn't announce itself with thunder. It was a quiet, gray Monday, the kind where the sun can't decide whether to come out or just give up. I found myself pacing the worn carpet of my apartment, triple-checking my emails, watching the clock crawl toward noon. On my desk sat a manila folder, thick with contracts, expense reports, and flight receipts. My evidence that I'd done what no one else on the Driefield robotics sales team could landed Abbott Manufacturing. The Abbott deal was more than just another contract. $2 million in net new business, a whale nobody in our region had even dared to chase, let alone land. It became my white whale. For months I'd been burning through cheap hotel breakfasts, stringing together back-to-back flights between Raleigh and Chicago, each time dipping into my own checking account, rationalizing that I'll get it back with the commission. No one at Driefield had offered to cover the costs. Budget's tight, Tyler had said, but if you pull this off, Jared, it'll pay off for everyone. I convinced myself the reward would justify the sacrifice. I missed my cousin's wedding, turned down weekends in Asheville with friends. My fiancée started asking if I was still planning to be at our engagement party. I told her, this is the one that changes everything. The day Abbott put pen to paper was a rush. The handshake, the signatures, the feeling of being the storm that turned drought to plenty. I called Tyler, Lawrence, even April from HR. No one picked up, too busy to care, it seemed, unless there was a fire to put out. I booked my own ticket home, exhausted and elated. At the office, I expected a hero's welcome, or at least acknowledgement. Instead, I returned to my cubicle to find only the familiar silence of clacking keyboards and the stale, recycled air of the open office. My inbox was flooded with spreadsheets, none of which said congratulations. The big team's celebration for hitting quarterly targets came and went. Tyler made a speech about collective effort and team wins without once mentioning my name. That night, scrolling through Instagram, I saw the others at some glossy downtown bar, glasses raised, a round courtesy of the company. I wasn't there, I hadn't even been invited. A few days later I mustered the nerve to pop into Lawrence's office. Just a quick update on Abbott, any word on commission? He was hunched over his phone, barely looked up. Timing's not great, we're reviewing compensation packages for Q2. Let's touch base soon, okay? The meeting lasted 90 seconds. That was it. 4 years of my life, $2 million in new revenue, and all the overtime they could wring out of me, but a pat on the back was too much to ask. I sat at my desk late that evening, the empty glow of Excel sheets casting shadows on the wall, feeling the sharpness of certainty cut through me. This system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. I opened up my resume for the first time since college and started typing. No fanfare, no anger, just a chill, methodical resolve. The last illusion had finally shattered. A new door opens, and the sting of betrayal. Opportunity, when it finally arrived, didn't come in a gilded envelope or with a triumphant phone call. It slipped in quietly, almost sheepish, through an email from Vanessa. She was a client from the Titan days who'd moved on to Revelin Publishing and apparently never quite forgot the way I'd once saved her team's deal from imploding at midnight during a product recall fiasco. Her message was short and to the point. Coffee this week? Let's talk. I have an opening on my team and you came to mind. It had been weeks since the Abbott deal debacle, days spent going through the motions in a job that felt increasingly foreign. I showed her email to Heather, my fiancée, over breakfast. Her smile, genuine, tired, hopeful, said what I needed. Go for it. The interview at Revlon was the opposite of Driefield in every conceivable way. The HR director greeted me by name, the coffee was fresh, nobody glanced sideways at each other over their laptops. Vanessa met me in the lobby with a warm hug, chatting about everything but business until the recruiter arrived. There were questions, but more curiosity than grilling. The atmosphere relaxed, like they were hunting for a fit, not an excuse to test my limits. I walked away feeling, for the first time in months, lighter. News travels fast in corporate America. Word of my meeting with Revelin somehow found its way back to Tyler before I even got home. He didn't call, didn't text. He simply escalated to Lawrence who, with his typical efficiency, sent out the pretext-laden email. Your recent actions indicate a lack of commitment to the team. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. HR will be in contact to process your transition. No exit interview, no chance to clear the air. I was informed via a system-generated message that my keycard access was revoked. There was no explosion, no angry outburst. I felt, strangely, an overwhelming sense of calm, as if some hidden tension had finally been released. Relief arrived as quietly as the termination notice had. The disappointment was sharp, but diluted by the recognition that this chapter had already ended for me long before the paperwork caught up. I took my box of things, now reduced to only what actually mattered: a battered journal, a favorite pen, a faded photo of Dad in his glory days, and drove home in the evening rain. The most cutting part, it turned out, wasn't the firing itself. It was the quick calculus among colleagues, The way sympathies vanished once the word got out that I was moving on. Where support once lived, now there was only an eager distancing, a clearing out of connections, as if losing my badge rendered my credibility radioactive. But walking out, I realized the real betrayal was not Tyler or Lawrence's handiwork. It was how easy it had become, in that world, for decency to rank below convenience and petty power moves. I closed my laptop, exhaled, and for the first time in years, let myself hope that there could be places, people, where the rules were different. The awakening of my self-worth. The legal turning point and the deeper wound from former colleagues. The first sign that the fallout from Titan, Driefield Robotics' sanitized American name, was about to escalate came not from managers, but from the mailroom. A thick envelope marked "Legal Notice Urgent" landed on my doorstep the morning after I'd signed my contract with Revelin. My heart hammered when I broke the seal and read the threats inside. Titan was accusing me of violating a non-compete, despite my certainty I'd never signed a single such agreement. Not in digital HR forms, not on onboarding day, not in any of the midnight paperwork marathons I'd survived. Still, the letter was loaded with ominous legalese, injunction threats, dire warnings about company secrets, and hints at financial ruin if I didn't back out of my new job. My hands shook as I called Revelin's legal counsel. Within days their team discovered not only was the non-compete forged, my signature replicated and misdated, but also evidence of data tampering orchestrated by people at the very heart of Titan management. The real gut punch, though, came from the way my former colleagues responded. Some I'd trained personally, others I'd covered for on rushed deadlines or stuck up for in tense meetings. Now their voices faded, Slack messages went unanswered, LinkedIn profiles mysteriously disconnected. No one wanted to be caught in the crossfire between the company's brass and the guy they'd decided was disposable. The pain of the lawsuit was its own beast, agonizing but, oddly, mechanical. Revelin's lawyers handled the salvos volleyed by Titan, systematically unraveling the fabricated claims, but the toll of exile from my old tribe cut deeper than court documents. Overnight I'd gone from Jared, the go-to guy, to that liability. I started noticing who kept their distance at industry mixers, who ducked out of group chats, and who, unmistakably, volunteered damning whispers about me at Titan just to cover themselves. It was a strange, hollowing feeling. The real injury wasn't the legal battle, but the proof that my value to them ended the moment my badge did. Through depositions and frantic witness interviews, fragments of truth emerged. Evidence that key leaders at Titan, desperate to save themselves, had authorized classic scapegoat tactics. April from HR, whom I'd once swapped pizza with on late data nights, now recited company talking points with chilling detachment. One tech support friend risked a single encrypted email, "Be careful who you trust, the story inside isn't what they claim," before vanishing behind a wall of silence. It wasn't just betrayal, it was active rewriting of history, with ex-friends angling for deniability at my expense. Each day my inbox filled with legal updates, affidavits, digital forensic reports, but with every passing week something else happened too. I stopped wishing for vindication from the people who left me behind. The legal drama would run its course. What stung sharper, and ultimately set me free, was the realization that my own worth was never meant to be collateral for someone else's escape. Titan could twist facts, colleagues could delete old photos and swap alliances, but my name only got stronger the longer I refused to bow. In the end, the deepest wound and the greatest lesson came not from the enemy, but from those who once called themselves friends. The truth unravels and Tyler's crucial key. New allies and the journey to expose the system. The days that followed Tyler's clandestine tip-off marked the beginning of a new phase in my battle with Titan, a shift from defensive survival to active resistance. For weeks my waking hours blurred into an endless cycle of cross-checking documents, prepping statements, and sifting through late-night emails for the slightest hint of new evidence. All the while, a name kept surfacing in my thoughts: Kevin Blackwell. Kevin was one of the most seasoned engineers I'd known at Titan, a quiet maverick who, months prior, had left under a dark cloud of rumors about substance issues. Even then, it had smelled all wrong. Kevin didn't fit the profile of a screw-up but of a scapegoat. We'd only exchanged a handful of words since his departure, but something in his last message, "If the walls could talk, they'd scream," felt suddenly relevant. Summoning my courage, I messaged Kevin through an encrypted chat. His reply came quickly, curt but curious. After some cautious circling, he opened up about his experience, how he'd been smeared by upper management after discovering irregularities in vendor payments, how his calls for investigation landed him on a blacklist, how Titan's clean-out tactics were systemic, not personal. "I kept receipts," he added. As it turned out, Kevin had amassed a silent arsenal, forensic snapshots of falsified vendor invoices, emails detailing backdoor arrangements, and timesheets showing work never performed. It was damning, and it resonated exactly with what Tyler's files hinted at. I realized in that moment we shared more than the sting of betrayal. We now had a shared mission. But knowledge alone was just ammunition. We needed strategy and backup. The answer came in the form of Vanessa, my new manager at Revelin, a veteran of more than one corporate showdown. Over coffee in a sun-drenched conference room I laid out everything: the forged non-compete, Tyler's secret disclosures, Kevin's exposé. To my relief, Vanessa didn't flinch. Instead, she looped in the Revelin legal team, who began drafting whistleblower disclosures without hesitation. The sense of isolation I'd carried for months started to dissolve, replaced by wary but steady hope. We weren't just pleading our case anymore, we were building something impregnable. The next steps were a blur of encrypted file transfers, sworn witness statements, and after-hours conference calls with legal counsel. Kevin and I collaborated on timelines and audit trails, piecing together individual puzzle fragments into a map of system-wide fraud. Vanessa's backing meant we were now on the radar of people who mattered: law firms, SEC contacts, the state attorney's office. I braced for retaliation, for the inevitable legal volleys and surreptitious attempts at character assassination. Some nights I lay awake cataloging everything that could go wrong, but the sense of purpose was stronger than the fear. In the weeks that followed, we submitted our report to the SEC and criminal authorities. For the first time, I felt the ground shift beneath Titan's feet instead of mine. My former tormentors scrambled, their air of invincibility cracking as subpoenas and warnings rained down. I wasn't naive about what waited on the other side: long investigations, possible collateral damage, reputational risk. But for the first time in years, the story was being written by those who had once been small and powerless. The alliance I'd once only fantasized about, Kevin, Vanessa, and me, standing up to the Goliath we all had reason to fear, was no longer a dream. That journey wasn't one of triumphal vengeance. It was a careful, grueling calibration of what justice meant in a world built to crush dissent. Still, as we guided the case forward, my weariness was shot through with resolve. The system might be built on silence, but now we had a microphone. And right then, that was all the hope I needed. Justice speaks up, and a new chapter begins. It's strange how sometimes the biggest changes don't feel real until you see them on the evening news. When word came down that federal agents, FBI jackets sharp in the early morning drizzle, had descended on Titan's glass and steel headquarters, it almost felt like a story belonging to someone else. I was sitting in the Revelon break room, stale coffee in hand, when Vanessa burst in with her phone aloft. "Jared, you need to watch this." There it was. Chiron scrolling in fat red font, reporters calling out the names of Titan's executives, one after another as they were led outside by agents. I expected elation, maybe closure. In truth, all I felt was a tired sort of justice, like something heavy uncoiling inside me, a pressure finally equalized. Titan's leaders, those whose signatures approved my dismissal, who piloted countless careers into dead ends, now faced their reckoning. Lawrence was arrested on charges of financial fraud and conspiracy, the CFO right behind him. As the revelations tumbled out, profit skimming, forged documents, systematic intimidation, the shockwaves hit every corner of the industry. Former colleagues who'd gone silent now flooded my phone, some apologizing, others digging for details, all scrambling to rewrite their own stories in the wake of Titan's collapse. For me, the practical effects landed swiftly. A settlement landed in my account, more than a year's salary, plus the commissions they'd once denied me, and a formal public apology to clear my name. But the real reward came quieter. Every week at Revelin I watched as new hires trickled in. Ex-Titan engineers, support staff, even a few bold sales reps. I headed up their onboarding sessions, determined to be the manager I'd always wanted. Honest, open, stubbornly protective of my people. Our team doubled revenues in months, setting new records in transparency and trust. When industry magazines called for interviews, I found myself talking less about the downfall of Titan and more about what it felt like to finally work in a place where people believed each other's words. There were still days when I caught myself flinching at the sight of a legal envelope or bracing for emails with bad news. Recovery from betrayal is slow, cellular almost, But every time our staff celebrated a win, I saw glimmers of something I'd lost sight of. Belonging, pride, faith and fairness. One afternoon as I packed up for the day, I spotted a mug from my Titan days, banished to a bottom drawer. For a moment memory threatened to sour everything. Instead, I set it on my desk at Revelin, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The darkness was real, but so was the dawn that followed. In the end, justice wasn't a gavel or a headline, it was the ongoing daily choice to show up for my team, to refuse shortcuts, and to use my voice, now a little steadier, for anyone tempted to think power was more important than principle. Titan became a cautionary tale, its ruins a lesson shared in boardrooms and break rooms from Boston to Raleigh. But for me, the new chapter was never about revenge. It was about learning finally, how to build something that couldn't be swayed by fear, only strengthened by truth. The true worth and a lesson that endures. In the quiet aftermath of everything, the lawsuits, the revelations, the public apologies, what lingered most wasn't the fleeting thrill of vindication, or even the financial restitution that finally landed in my bank account. It was the slow, profound reckoning with what I'd been chasing all those years. For so long my sense of value had been shaped by quotas met, contracts won, and the praise or silence of people whose approval now felt hollow. Once Titan's collapse became industry news, colleagues who used to look right through me would stop me in the halls of conferences, some apologetic, others apprehensive, asking what it had felt like to bring down the giants. But the real gravity lay elsewhere. I began to see success with new eyes. The office awards, LinkedIn endorsements, even my bank statement, all of it paled next to simple moments of integrity and self-respect. At Revelin, every time I reviewed a contract or let a client call, I caught myself leaning harder into the guiding lessons my father once offered. Solve the real problem, keep your word, never use power to crush the powerless. And I watched these ideals ripple outward, not in grand declarations but in the subtle ways my new team showed up for one another, pushed for clarity instead of convenience, asked questions nobody at Titan had ever dared voice. A pivotal lesson took root the night I celebrated with my family. Nothing extravagant, just a dinner in New Jersey surrounded by people who knew the cost behind the win. My father looked across the table and said quietly, "What I'm proud of, son, is not that you won, it's that you refused to become bitter." That stuck with me, shaping the choices I made going forward. When new hires came on board, fresh-faced, a little hungry, sometimes scared, I tried to mentor them not just in closing deals but in guarding their principles. If they asked about Titan, I didn't tell them tales of villains and retribution. I spoke instead about the temptation to compromise and how easy it is to let disappointment harden you if you forget who you are. Over time, the symbols of my past became just that, symbols. The old mug from Titan sat on a shelf in my new office, not as a trophy, but as a quiet reminder of what survival really meant. My battered Toyota Corolla, still dusty but dependable, reminded me that worth isn't measured in status but in what you can build, safeguard, and share with others. Even during difficult quarters, when deals stalled, when personalities clashed, there was an undercurrent of gratitude for the new hard-won clarity. I realized that my name, my reputation, would forever outlast any paycheck or business card if I honored it in small ways, every single day. The lasting lesson wasn't about winning lawsuits or toppling corrupt executives. It was the discovery that real value stems from the courage to hold your line when it would be easier to bend, and from believing that longevity in business means never trading away your heart for your title. In boardrooms and break rooms, at industry panels and in late-night emails, I found my voice again, not louder, but steadier. The real legacy I wanted to leave wasn't a cautionary tale about betrayal, but a living example of how to weather the storms with your integrity and your humanity intact.